Yeah, we don't have to talk about a lot of it. None of it's like incredibly compelling.
I'm assuming Johnny Walker is a late replacement.
Who fucking knows anymore? I don't know.
It doesn't seem like the kind of matchup they would have, had fermenting over time.
Yeah, not after that. You'd think there'd be some kind of step up after that.
Oh, I'm making alcohol puns, damn you.
Let's see.
Acknowledge my terrible...
Oh, wait, what did you say? I missed it.
It's not the kind of matchup they would have had fermenting over time.
Oh, that's good. All right. Very good. Sorry. I think you needed to distill that joke down to its base parts for me to get it.
Yeah, that's what we need.
Let's just do this for the show. Fuck the analysis. Let's just try to come up with as many whiskey puns as we can.
We'll run out of them pretty quickly.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, once again, is Phil McKenzie. Should I start calling you the good doctor as well? That almost just came right out of my mouth without thinking about it, but it was a pretty good bit.
You may as well, just on the off chance that Pat's listening and it pisses him off.
Yeah.
That's a good reason for doing pretty much anything.
Yeah, I agree. Man, that's what we need, Phil, is just more like savage arguments about really pointless minutia.
Such as? I'm game.
Well, just about like fights that really don't matter. Like those are always the ones that created the biggest outbursts. Where we're just you get really bogged down on one that really shouldn't have produced an argument. People don't know this, but there was the first argument that Dr. Wyman and I ever had was not even recorded for an episode. It was about Nicholas Dalby versus Zach Cummings.
Oh, no, I'm sure you did have that argument.
It wasn't on the show. Yeah, we may have brought it up.
Yeah.
Pat was convinced that Zach Cummings could not trouble Nicholas Dalby in the clinch the way Darren Till did, and Pat was fucking wrong, as he always was. So, glad to have you here, Phil. You're never wrong.
Yeah, if we do have any of these arguments, Connor will immediately be retconning his victories as soon as my back is turned.
No retconning required when you pick them all correctly. Speaking of which, we are going to be talking about both. I mean, you guys know the drill, right? Last weekend's fights and next weekend's fights. We're looking at the UFC. Schedule's a little, it's a little thin, I guess. We're in the fight night phase, moving towards, what's our next big card? Blades.
It's gotta be Holloway Ortega, right?
Blades and Ngannou too is a pretty compelling main event, I think. But the rest of that card's not that great, so. Yeah, it does feel, man. Okay, there's some good stuff coming up. Dos Anjos, Usman, there's Pedro Munoz, Brian Caraway. Okay, there's things in the future. But for now, we are between Korean Zombie versus Yair Rodriguez and next week's Neil Magny versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. And we're going to kick things off with the recap portion of the show because I know you're all just slavering and shaking with anticipation about seeing Neil Magny back in the cage, but I think a good number of people are probably still talking and thinking about what happened last weekend, especially in the main event, the fight between Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, and Yair Rodriguez, both men making their returns after about a year and a half each. Chan Sung Jung off of a comeback victory over Dennis Bermudez. That was quickly followed by a knee injury. Yair Rodriguez off of his first big crushing prospect loss to Frankie Edgar. And the knockout was insane. That's really that's all that needs to be said. It was one of the most unorthodox strikes I have seen land in MMA, a sport which sort of prides itself on having unorthodox shit happen. It was weird. It was perfectly albeit not necessarily, it was perfectly timed. Doesn't mean the timing wasn't still, fortunate, if you know what I mean. Because I can't imagine that kind of shot landing in the last second of an exhausting fight like that again. But It was pretty crazy. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, this has got to be one of the, like, I don't think we're ever going to see a strike that purely ridiculous landing in a context that incredibly insane again. I mean, that had been a brutal back and forth war for pretty much the entire fight. And then Rodriguez lands a strike so incredibly improbable that it looks honestly, I mean, I barely even saw it the first time it came out. Did you? I was just like, what the fuck happened?
What? Yeah, I just thought Chan Sung Jung's battery ran out. He just collapsed into a heap.
I mean,
a strike that almost,
it looked accidental.
Exactly. Almost looked accidental. Like, that would be so hard to replicate. But I mean, the thing is I heard about this before I actually saw it. I watched this one after the fact, so I was aware that the upset was coming. Took some of the glee out of witnessing it, or at least the disbelief. But it did give me, like, I think, an interesting perspective on how the fight was playing out, because of course the big story was that not only was it a big knockout with 1 second to go in the fight, but it was a comeback. Yair Rodriguez was down 3-1, I think on all 3 scorecards at the time. And
I think it was 2 scorecards. I think he had he was drawing it was 2-2 on the last one.
But he would have, at the very least, without that knockout, lost a majority draw or a majority win.
Yep.
Majority decision is the words I was looking for. And watching it, so I kind of expected, like, all right, Korean Zombie did good, and Yair Rodriguez just found some crazy shit out of nowhere. Not to take any shine off of that win by praising him, but Yair Rodriguez looked improved to me. Like, it was very, very competitive throughout. He had a lot of answers that weren't just the wild, insane shit. The wild, insane shit, as it often has, finished the fight for him. But do you agree? Did you think his fundamentals looked much sharper, like, throughout the entire contest?
I'm honestly not sure. I mean, I thought he did a good job, and like, a lot of people were just like, well, Jung, and I suspect a lot of people who were just kind of salty and just thought Jung, the Korean Zombie was just tooling him. I mean, I think that was doing a disservice to Rodriguez, because, like you said, he landed a ton of clean, damaging offense, like, especially throughout those first 3 rounds. And I'm not sure whether he looked better. I think we're slightly, perhaps the pendulum has slipped slightly too much in the other direction for Rodriguez, because, I mean, he's a very wild puncher on the back foot, but he's not an inaccurate one, and he's still able to throw, like, good fundamental, like, he's still able to throw, like, fundamental leg and body kicks. He's always been able to do that stuff. And other than that, he just moves extremely quickly, and he's very hard to track down. And that was always going to be something of an issue for Korean Zombie, just because he is pretty plodding. Like, we talk a lot about how footwork is often small adjustment steps and little pivots and these tiny things you can, that's what we consider to be efficient footwork. And it is true. But there are also, if you genuinely are foot slow, you will also have a problem with people who are just fast. So yeah, I'm not sure if he was, I mean, once again, I was just amazed at the pace this guy can keep. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. That is always impressive. He's phenomenally well conditioned, especially, again, like, as we were all saying after the Alex Caceres fight. And I just want to say again, man, I would sure love to rewatch that fight sometime.
Oh yeah.
But, considering the insane shit he does constantly, his stamina is astounding. So yeah, I don't want to swing the pendulum too far that way, as you said, but, there were a couple, we'll talk about this when we get to Macy Barber too, right? Because, like, I praised her briefly on last week's episode, and I was like, oh, she does this, she does this, she does this. And, I want to be more specific describing those things. Like, when I say Macy Barber, has a good jab. It's not necessarily that it's like a really good, sharp, technical jab. A lot of times I'm thinking of the process behind it, though. I like the fact that Macy Barber throws a jab as a first line of defense and covers her retreats with her jab and pokes and prods and creates openings with it. That's something you don't always see out of young fighters. And Yair Rodriguez, I think, looked like he had a significantly better process in this fight. He was working the leg kicks right from the beginning, but he was really, really focusing on his jab. He did a great job in the first round of countering Korean Zombie's naked kicks with that piercing jab. Like, Rodriguez has, honestly, in the past, been often a one-handed fighter. Super dexterous with both legs, but, like, only ever throws the backhand or weird punches off of his kicks. So I don't know. It was really nice to see him, like, pivoting and maintaining distance behind the jab. It was nice to see him, I don't know, he was still like falling out of his stance and stuff with his defense, but it was a little better, you know. He was moving his head. One thing that really stood out is that he was keeping his eyes on Korean Zombie while he was evading punches a lot more than he used to. Because used to he would do this sort of, I can tell something's coming, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm going to duck as fast as I can, look at the floor, and just try to move my head somewhere else. And here he was rolling under punches and stuff and trying to get his shoulder between himself and an incoming blow and keeping his eyes on Korean Zombie the whole time. He's clearly at least been working on something, or has at least gained some better appreciation for the little finer details of fighting, the sort of the rhythms and the processes that you just kind of work through enough times they become second nature. And I like to see that. He's a phenomenal athlete. I want to see him grow into a really consistent fighter as well. And I think this was at the very least a step in the right direction. Like, at the very least, he had a competitive ass fight. Even without that knockout, he had a very competitive fight with Korean Zombie for 5 rounds.
Yeah. I mean, the question is, was that knockout actually a good thing for him?
Well,
or
that's always the problem.
Send him into fights that he's not ready for, and is it going to tell him, you know what, you were kind of losing that fight, but then you know what saved you? Insane shit. You know what you should do more often? Insane shit.
Yeah, it's not a small chance that will send the wrong message to both him and the promoters about what he should be doing next. But I liked it, you know, and
yeah. I mean, it was a great fight. You know, it's certainly not the fight of the year or whatever, no. As you know, a few people have said, as there is always a chorus of behind every high-profile good fight that happens. It is not Whittaker Romero 2, which is the obvious frontrunner in my opinion.
Yes.
But
knockout of the year?
It was really good. So I mean, so what else did what did Chan Sung Jung do? Because I think what we saw from him was. And this was one of the things that we've seen before from, you know, when we talk about kicks versus punches. I think we definitely saw Jung capitalizing on the kind of the idea of energy expenditure, because a lot of his approach was just far more efficient than Rodriguez's. And even though Rodriguez had that kind of, you know, has that kind of bizarre, endless gas tank, it was not only the idea of, it wasn't just the fact that he had to, that he was expending a lot of energy when he kicked, but it was the fact that it was also a big commitment. So that combined with the fact that his, foot was clearly damaged meant that as the fight went on, Jung was able to draw him more into boxing exchanges. And what he was doing that was just with very, very minimalist kind of head movement and countering. And I think, you know, one of the things we mentioned in the run-up was that Jung was not just countering, you know, with single shots, but he was countering with combinations. He was stepping forward into them, something you could see in the Bermudez fight. So Rodriguez can punch moving backwards. He's not, as I said, he's not bad at it. He's one of those guys who's got obviously has an instinctive knack for knowing where people are going to be in space and hitting them. But he does, as you also mentioned, throw himself out of position a lot. So Korean Zombie was able to kind of push him back and eventually managed to largely draw the fight into that kind of more efficient, more kind of technique and defense based fight as the fight went on, right until he got knocked the fuck out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a good read. I really enjoy like the direction that Chan Sung Jung's style has taken. He's got his he's one of those fighters where the things I want to praise about him, you could very easily poke holes in whatever I say. Like if I say Korean Zombie has good intelligent defense, like he gets hit a lot, a fair amount, and is so aggressive with his counters that he tends to walk into shit early when he's really trying to force those combinations and so on and so forth. So there are obviously flaws, but again, like the process is really good. And I think a lot of the flaws do have to do with the athletic limitations that you kind of talked about. He's just kind of slow and heavy on his feet. And that's his style. And it's a tricky style to make work in MMA when people can kick you in the leg and shit. It's much harder than in boxing to just sort of slowly, methodically stalk your foe and lay behind your shoulder and wait for them to waste their energy. Like you're going to be giving them more targets. So it makes sense that he would have to immediately start triggering his combinations. And for all those difficulties, like he did a really good job building his attack in this fight, I thought. As each round went on, the combinations were really well put together, nice slips, and then like uppercut hook combos, weird shifting combinations to take advantage of the fact that Yair was just backing up in straight lines and throwing himself out of position. An old habit he still has obviously not gotten rid of. And yeah, then sometimes, Korean Zombie gets tagged, throwing his counter, and then he just counters again and just piles the stress onto the game of the less experienced fighter. I thought it was a really good performance from both guys, to be honest. I liked a lot of the nuances of what I saw.
Yeah. I mean, and it was also just one of those fights where you could see it taking things out of the fighters as it went on. It's one of those fights where you look at it and you just think, you have both limited your ability to have these kind of fights like this in the future.
Yeah,
like,
maybe not the greatest fight of the year, but a grueling fight, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, they both took horrendous shots.
Yeah.
I mean, it was because it's often that, when people get knocked down in fights, that's generally when you obviously tend to think of a fight as being this kind of, as being a huge war. But in this case, they just took massive shots and then just sort of blinked and staggered and, rarely even, looked particularly rocked. But you could just, when that kind of thing happens, when a massive hitter, like, just cracks someone and they just blink and reset, it's always something that makes me think, you're not going to be able to do that many more times. Mm-hmm. It's something that we've kind of seen from Max Holloway.
Sure.
Is that his ability to do that. But but we saw that happen to both guys like multiple times. Mm-hmm. So, I was tremendously impressed by it. Like the heart of Rodriguez, his foot was clearly hurt, mm-hmm. but as I said, his pace. And whilst the finish itself wasn't, it was incredibly low percentage. It obviously was something that he intended to happen. So I hesitate to call it a fluke because basically every one-punch knockout has at least some measure of luck involved in it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was incredibly low percentage. If they ran it back, Korean Zombie probably wouldn't get knocked out, 1 in 1,000 times by that shot, if that.
If that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of flukes, or speaking of classic Wyman-Rebush arguments, let's go ahead and run that one back. Let's talk about what the definition of a fluke is. Was this a fluke? No, yeah, it was an intentional technique. It took advantage however deliberate it was, it took advantage of something that was happening frequently in the fight up to that point, which is that Rodriguez would be put on the retreat. Jung would chase after him, swinging with both hands, and Rodriguez would just sort of like, especially by the end of the fight, as both guys were absorbing a lot of damage and fatigue as well. His defense was getting pretty sloppy, and he was just sort of ducking his head and bending at the waist and desperately getting under punches and then skirting out to the side. And again, I don't know how thoroughly this was planned, but in retrospect, like, you can watch the whole 5th round up to that point, and you can watch a lot of the fight up to that point and see Korean Zombie wading in, and just throwing punches, missing over Rodriguez's head. And like Yair, it stood out to me that like, why he's able to take most of these shots is that Korean Zombie also does an amazingly good job of keeping his eyes on his opponent at all times, which is also why he's such a good, accurate counterpuncher despite not being all that quick. But this one of those shots, like an overhand against a really tall guy, where keeping your eyes on like the center of your opponent's mass is what sets you up to be killed by the shot, which is like arcing in this weird direction from outside your line of sight. So, yeah, you could see that coming in advance, that there were many times where his chin was suspended right over Yair Rodriguez's back as Yair was bent over. It's just, who the fuck would imagine that would be a really dangerous place for your chin to be? You know, normally you're looking out for a hook or an overhand if the guy's ducking down and he's going to hit you with something from the side. You would never, ever call that coming.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's something that I'd like to address, which is the whole idea that I've heard from a few people was that it was just dumb for Zombie to rush in at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And I just don't get that at all, because A, it was a close competitive fight. He was up on one scorecard. Mm-hmm. You know, he was up by one scorecard. The 5th round was not one-sided at all. Mm-hmm. And throughout literally the entire fight, Rodriguez's ability to counterpunch, and specifically his ability to counterpunch past the first shot in a combination, had been, you know, near zero.
Yeah.
And more than that, he was clearly, visibly in a completely compromised situation. I mean, you know, he was hunched over, which was why the shot worked.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems that the height of sort of revisionism to say that, like, you know, because the alternative had been that, like, if somehow Zombie had known that he was up and had taken that guess, he'd like coasted and backed up, or like, why would you let an incredibly dynamic, seemingly inexhaustible kicker just...
You should give this guy space, yeah.
Yeah. It just completely baffles me. It's like, and then, he's somehow you're gonna get him into this completely, utterly compromised situation. He's just gonna hit you with the most insane low percentage shit anyone has ever hit anyone with in the UFC. You can't fight like that. You can't be thinking like, oh my God, this guy's, you know, I've just completely crumpled this guy and forced him into the crowd. But what if he just knocks me out with Bruce Lee's split kick as I rush? Like, it was never going to happen. You can't have 1,000,000 to 1 chances stopping you from doing things.
It's a very teleological view of how the fight was playing out. Like, everything was leading up to this. It's like, you realize how improbable it is that anyone would have seen what this was leading to until it happened.
Yeah, I mean, Jung did pretty much exactly the right thing. I mean, it just happens. Just like Rodriguez meant to knock him out, and you know, Rodriguez meant to throw that strike. It landed, but it wouldn't land most of the time. You can't let that kind of stop you from fighting the optimal fight for the guy in front of you.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to say, just before we wrap up on this, and we'll move on in a moment, but I don't know, it was a very interesting dynamic in this fight going on with a developing younger fighter and a really crafty old pro, basically. But you mentioned the heart of Yair Rodriguez, and like, there's always a slim chance when you're way down in a fight. But we saw how insanely tough he is against Frankie Edgar. he can take a hell of a beating and not actually give up or be put away. And here, like, that's the time to pull some Hail Mary shit. You know, you feel like you might be down. You're probably down in a really close back and forth fight. Like, it doesn't often happen, but that is something you want to see out of someone. If you still consider Yair a prospect at this point, that's what you want to see, is that he does not go down without a fight. He knew he knew the fight was not entirely going his way. And he was like, well, I'm just going to pull out all of my weirdest shit in the final 10 seconds to see if I can walk him in to the most improbable elbow ever thrown. So, good shit.
Yeah. I mean, just one more thing. Is I would like to see, this is the thing though, I would still like to see more of a functional game from Rodriguez, just because you just realize looking at these fights how insanely talented he actually is.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he's got heart for days. He's got shocking power, ridiculous cardio, insane speed. Like, he has every single possible physical gift you could ask for. He is one of the, he is one of the top 5 athletes in the UFC at the moment, almost certainly. It was insane, and it was fun, and it was great, and he managed to get, one of the biggest wins we've seen. But I would like to, I'm also just find myself thinking, man, imagine if this guy imagine if this guy went to Tiger Schulman.
Yeah, our new favorite team, Tiger Schulman becoming the new MMA lab, the underappreciated great team. To your point, like, not to just fall back on easy MMA math, but like Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, small steps in the right direction is the point I want to make. Like, it's some kind of improvement. Yair got mopped by Frankie Edgar in that last fight. He didn't get a single positive thing done. And just very basic MMA math, but the Korean Zombie who showed up here tonight would have competed with Frankie Edgar, in my opinion. Could have been stuffing takedowns and landing uppercuts and putting lots of pressure on, and had a very competitive fight with a guy as good and as crafty as Frankie Edgar. So
Frankie Edgar can get hit by uppercuts?
Yeah, it's possible. So, like, I don't know. I do want to mention too, like, Yair's takedown defense looked pretty good too. I think Korean Zombie is an underrated wrestler, and there were quite a few times he had like the body lock on Yair and couldn't get shit done with it. So, I don't know. I like it. I'm hopeful as you are to see something more, but I think we did see some small signs suggesting that he has at least, even if just passively, learned some more process based skills. So, all right, let's take a break then, because we're at like 26 minutes already. This is what we do, Phil, when we got somewhat thin material to talk about, just naturally expand the discussion and find all the little nooks and crannies. But what the hell else is this kind of show for? So we'll take a break. When we come back, we are going to discuss the one or two other things from UFC Denver that caught our interest. Namely, I think we're going to have to talk about Donald Cerrone's first round submission win over Mike Perry. We're also going to look at the very impressive debut of new women's strawweight up and comer Macy the Future Barber. And maybe something else besides. And then after that, we are going to get into next week's card. Again, that's Neil Magny versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. And the co-main event of that one is a featherweight fight that I am very interested in. Ricardo Llamas versus Darren Elkins. Both guys looking for the comeback. Both very experienced, very good contenders in that division. So we'll get to all of that and maybe more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are still talking about UFC Denver, a.k.a. Korean Zombie versus Yair Rodriguez, the co-main event, Donald Cerrone versus Mike Perry. Phil, we both picked Cowboy here, didn't we?
We did.
Feels like a lot of people were counting him out. I know he's had a rough stretch lately, but Mike Perry is Mike Perry. And I think that was a very important aspect of why this fight might have played out the way it did. Donald Cerrone is an extremely, extremely experienced competitor. And basically more than anything, that is what came through to me in this fight. We didn't get to see a lot, to be honest. It was only a few minutes of a single round. But, and it's not like it was all going easily Donald Cerrone's way. Not a ton of decisive action was happening up to the point of the finish. But, it just seemed like, I don't know, in retrospect, you gotta pick a guy like Donald Cerrone over Mike Perry, right? Like, he just knows too much.
Yeah, it was, yeah, I mean, and one of these things is that he doesn't just know a lot, but he is trained with Mike Perry. And this is sort of one of the worst situations to be in if you're a relatively limited younger fighter, because the best advantage the younger fighter has over the older one is that he's unpredictable. Is that, you know, he can't be, it always takes the older fighter some time to contextualize the younger one, you know, to figure out where he fits, you know, is he like this guy I fought? Is he like this guy? What is he like in this situation? They've sparred before. I think more than that, I think they've grappled before, which makes Perry's decision to try and get top position on Cerrone all the more baffling.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was looking at people who looking at Cowboy's struggles and seeing a violent force of nature across from him that made a lot of people think, well, this is just going to be a rerun of the Darren Till fight or something like that. Mm-hmm. But as I think we mentioned, I think Cerrone's historic issue has been people who can match his range, people who he can't just kick and snipe from the outside, people who are either forced to or simply naturally do try and blitz to cover space to get to him. He doesn't particularly like to pressure and move forward.
What the fuck is that, Phil?
Right, so I've just emailed him. So, do we want to just restart this segment?
We'll be fine. Where do we leave off?
So we were basically, I was basically saying,
Donald Cerrone's historical troubles.
Yeah, so Cerrone's historic troubles have been when people can match him at range and kind of force the pocket when he doesn't want them to. And this means specifically people who can kind of expose his lack of depth in boxing range. And those who are either forced to blitz over space or just naturally do due to their style, he's pretty much always done fairly well against those guys. It's if someone is lengthy and rangy, like a Masvidal or a Diaz, and they can just box with him at the limit of his kicking range and just stick in that range, he becomes profoundly uncomfortable. Even Benson Henderson in their third fight, which I think Henderson won. Agreed. And the main thing is that, you know, you can look at all these losses that Cerrone has had and think, how much is Mike Perry like any of these guys? Because Leon Edwards is both technically much better than Mike Perry and also a much more functional range kickboxer. Like, he punches straighter. He has he just has a very crisp 1-2. He moves better. He is someone who could sit at the limit of Cerrone's range and just box him up, as he did. And more than that, you just have to, and if you're going to be like, well, Cerrone is just, you know, he's a bit fragile nowadays. He can be stuck out at distance. I mean, he can, you know, you can come in and you can crack him. You can be like, is Cerrone even now, is he either less technical or chinnier than Alan Jouban?
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, that's a very fair point. Yeah. I do think, too, like another narrative that instantly jumped out at me watching this fight was that we briefly mentioned last week the idea that Mike Perry is, like, in small ways getting worse. That, like, in trying to shape his game for like the first time. He has sort of taken the dangerous organic feel out of some of it, where at the very least he used to just instinctively, like throw back when people were trying to hit him, and had a very simple, very straightforward idea of what he wanted to do to his opponents. And I think that, like, I don't know that he ever had any thought in general, but I don't know that he ever had a thought about, like what kind of fighter he wanted to be. I think he came into his career and was like, well, my goal is to knock people the fuck out. The best way to do that is to just constantly walk towards them. And, when they step in to try to hit me, I'm going to hit them. And that works against a lot of people. There are obviously limitations, as the likes of Alan Jouban and now many others have shown. But now, Mike Perry is not that guy at the moment, at least. And I'm still open to the idea that he might be in a transitional phase, having somewhat recently moved to the new camp, Jackson Wink, and undoubtedly changed his training in a lot of ways, and so on and so forth. But also, like, Mike Perry needs to pressure. You know what I mean? Like, if he's not putting a lot of pressure on you and cutting off the cage, like, it does seem baffling to me that against Donald Cerrone, he did not seem prepared to do that. Like, it's not only what Mike Perry historically does best, but it's what, as you said, what Donald Cerrone struggles with. And yet, Mike Perry was, like, immediately engaging in the clinch. Like, I know you're good in the clinch, but that's kind of Cerrone shit, Like, do you really want to make that the crux of your first round approach to Donald Cerrone, the most critical point in any Cerrone fight, the first round, when you show him how much he has to fear you, and you're like, I'm going to tie up with him and maybe trade some knees? I don't know. It's like,
I mean, I feel like it was not a bad idea, because at least Perry is certainly physically stronger than Cerrone, no doubt.
Yeah.
He is, I mean, there's a decent chance that he could have just kneed Cerrone in the gut and Cerrone just exploded, because he's Donald Cerrone and he has fragile guts. Yeah, like, trading knees in the clinch for me is, I feel like that's where Perry's game is the most stable, just in the clinch. He is one of those guys where he works best when he has his hands on his opponent and he knows where they're going. I felt like that was somewhere where he had an opportunity to compete with Cerrone on a technical level. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, not much happened in this fight, but also it was all Cerrone what actually did happen.
Yeah, it's just that I didn't see anything that I would have wanted to see out of Mike Perry. Like, if the story for Perry is supposed to be move to the new camp, and now essentially whether deliberately or not, the idea has been created that now Mike Perry is the new Jackson Wink up and comer. He's the new star there. It's Jones Rashad all over again, with all the strife between them. And then, like, Mike Perry comes in, he doesn't feint at all. He doesn't use his jab more. He doesn't really seem any more comfortable cutting off the cage. He seemed like unimproved, but with less intention to his game. And that, I don't know. I don't like that.
So question then, who would you class as the best functional pressure striker to ever come out of Jackson Wink?
That's a good question. Jesus. Carlos Condit, whose game consisted
that was the one I was thinking of as well.
Yeah,
and it's not a great example.
Whose game really, really relied on having what might be the best chin in MMA history. Yeah.
Right. And also on a lot of movement and distance.
It doesn't seem like the best move possible for Mike Perry. Like, you can easily imagine Mike Perry with Rafael Cordero, or Mike Perry with John Crouch, or Mike Perry. Like, there's a lot of guys who could train a good, consistent, aggressive style.
Yep. Even like, if you wanted to make him an absolute terror for one round, even Henry Hooft.
Sure. Yeah, why the fuck not? I mean, Mike Perry is insanely insecure. He was at the press conference before the card, and someone was like, oh, so you and Luis Pena are best friends? And his immediate thought to the notion of having a male best friend was that it was gay. Mike
Yeah.
Perry is the dude who will not shake hands with another man. Mike Perry is the dude who will not sit in a movie theater seat next to another man. That he would be both the perfect and the worst possible person to be trained by Henry Hooft.
It would be amazing.
It would be incredible. Yeah, it does feel like there are a lot of better options for him than Jackson Wink. So I don't know. Like I still have my same estimation of Mike Perry as a talent. He's really strong. He's really powerful. He's really tough. He's got tons of heart, but I am definitely now losing hope that he will actually be able to develop into anything, because it doesn't seem like he's taking the right steps. His fights are still, he's accruing lots of damage. He didn't get hit in the head a lot in this one, but he did get his arm broken. So it's not good signs for Mike Perry. And that man is not going to be taking any steps down in competition.
Yeah, I mean, so presumably next he's going to be fighting Yancy Medeiros, right?
That seems like a logical choice that the UFC will absolutely make, yes.
Yeah, and he's going to lose that fight, right?
Yeah, I mean, probably. I mean, it's one of those fights where he's obviously got a chance. Yancy is himself incredibly hittable, but Yancy also has reach on Mike Perry, and Mike Perry seems to be losing the sense of what he should be doing. So yeah, he'll probably lose that.
I think this is the thing, yeah. So he's been in the UFC for now a bit over 2 years, although it doesn't feel that long. But it's hard to say that he really looks any better than the guy who fought Jung Lim, and he probably looks worse than the guy who fought Danny Roberts. So There you go.
Yeah, I think I may be reconfiguring. I was working on that Lando Venata piece last week about essentially the question being, is Lando Venata more than just a brawler? What's the reason for the fact that all of his fights are incredibly violent and incredibly close? But like, there are so many parallels between Venata and Perry, down to the gym that they trained at and the gym that produced them in a sense, and the way that they were matched by the UFC and everything. It's just like, it does make you a little sad. Like, but it is also, it's Mike Perry. I mean, he's very dumb and kind of a douche, so it's okay, I guess. Yep. All right, let's move on then. Last one from this card that I want to talk about. Macy Barber, the future Barber. She, I guess I have to repeat this classic, newspaper headline style pun I made in our pre-show discussion, but, the future Barber gave Hannah Cifers a pretty slick fade with some brutal elbows on the ground. What did you think of her performance?
Yeah, it was exactly what you want to see. I mean, we saw two fighters like elsewhere on the card in Cooper and Yoda, and they were sort of examples of what somewhat failed strawweight prospects look like, not to be too harsh to them. And this was a fight between two, and I think, Cifers herself I thought she showed a lot of promise. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a fight between two women that I'm going to be definitely looking forward to seeing more of in the future. I mean, Macy Barber was particularly fun to see, because it's always interesting when someone makes that step up from the regionals to the UFC, and they don't look. A lot of the time, people look less destructive, and she looked more destructive.
Yes, yeah, she was amped at the opportunity. Like, and that's how it was on her Contender Series fight as well. Like, she clearly has it in her to step up, to make a big step up in competition and just be as confident as ever. It didn't look like there were any jitters of any kind. She's got some pretty crazy self-belief. Overall her game, clearly, chin way too high a lot of the time. Just sort of overconfidently wading into range. Like, she's got that nice jab that she was popping Cifers' head back with in the first couple minutes, and then she sort of forgot about it and leaned on her kicking game. I think she's like Rory McDonald. It's the comparison that jumps to mind. The young MMA native, who seems capable of, like, seems really strong and can put a multi-dimensional performance on pretty good opponents coming up. But I just liked that what am I saying here? Yeah, that's right. Her problems are sort of the problems you expect out of a fighter with that background. Like, She's been learning from the beginning, which wasn't all that long ago, to do all of this shit. And so it's like having too many options is another form of like running out of ideas, where you just sort of forget the general process of how you're fighting. You just sort of forget the basic method of how all the pieces fit together because you have all of these options. You're like, well, maybe I'll try this. Maybe I'll try this. But also the things that you want to see out of an MMA native, so to speak, like skills in transitions, looking pretty damn sharp. There was a moment where, for example, I mean, the elbows in the clinch were a highlight, as were the insane ground and pound. But there was a great moment there where like Cypher's was coming on strong, and Barber's, her head was up in the air, and she was put on the retreat, and there was a messy exchange about to happen, and she grabbed the clinch and basically spun Cypher's and flung her into the fence. She basically bounced her off the chain link into an elbow coming off of it. And that kind of shit is like, you've got a good young athlete with lots of heart whose confidence doesn't suffer at all for her first UFC fight, and she is just flowing in transitions like that. I think the more fundamental skills will continue developing, but that is, to me, a very good sign. I mean, she's clearly got a natural knack for grappling and striking in transition. She's got that, that very traditional martial arts influence stand-up style, but in the good ways. Mm-hmm. In that it's a lot of playing off the jab and the kick as the double threat. Sort of
Robert
Whittaker kind of thing going on at times.
Yep. Robert Whittaker, old school John McDessie, that kind of, I think it's a very optimal kind of way of fighting for MMA.
It's not
all that
just
stuff is really good.
Not just pulling out like Taekwondo kicks. It's more of like an American kickboxing kind of style. Like, with like decent boxing, and how does that play off of really quick, snappy high kicks and shit?
Yep. I mean, her main issue is that, she's incredibly confident and wants big fights, and that's going to get her into like tough fights sooner rather than later. But, it'll be fun, ones that I'm going to be interested to see her in. I mean, I don't think she has the level of completely nuclear athleticism she needs to back up quite the level of confidence that she has at the moment. Mm-hmm. Because if you think of the idea is that, her current trajectory where she wants to get the biggest fights possible and be the youngest strawweight champion ever and so on. And Rose was pretty damn young when she won the belt. Mm-hmm. I mean, well, to be honest, that gives Macy Barber 4 or 5 years, which is more than reasonable. But there's also the idea of like, I don't know if Macy Barber showed the level of, Tatiana Suarez, basically.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
I would be worried about.
Exactly what I was thinking. I mean, like, it's still not at all, wouldn't shock me. She called out Mackenzie Dern, like.
She did call out Mackenzie Dern.
Yeah, which makes sense as a call out. I think if you're trying to rocket up the rankings and you've got somebody with big name value and very dangerous skills, but also someone who is similarly undeveloped in certain areas, that's something. But also, like the problem that Rory McDonald ran into occasionally was like people who were really specialized, people who were more experienced. Macy Barber's ground and pound is something, but can she out wrestle and outstrike on the ground with someone like Tatiana Suarez? It does seem hard to believe at the moment. Like Suarez, who is just a even stronger and a better, like quicker, more explosive athlete, at least at a glance. Yeah, she still looks very much like a prospect in development, but certainly one with promise. And women's strawweight just kind of rules, so it's good to have her in an already stacked division. And I'm excited to see how many improvements she can make going forward. I hope she joins Jackson Wink. That seems like that'd be the right move for a developing prospect at this point in the gym's history. All right. Well, that's pretty much it from Rodriguez versus the Zombie. We'll take one more break. When we come back, Neil Magny versus Santiago Ponzinibbio, Ricardo Llamas versus Darren Elkins, and being quite honest, that's probably it after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Hello, and welcome back. I don't know why I'm saying hello in the third segment. I'm stuck on autopilot. But welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about next week's card, as I said before. And, well, I guess we'll start with the main event, Phil. Neil Magny, Santiago Ponzinibbio. Is it weird that I don't feel like I care about this all that much? Like, it's a relevant fight. Yeah, that is weird.
Yeah, it's weird.
All right, let me have it.
Care about this.
Come
it's
on.
Gonna be good. Like,
yeah.
Neil Magny is rarely in boring fights. I know he's somewhat of a meme for being the sort of overrated welterweight guy, but
I don't think he's overrated at all. I don't think people rate him very highly, to be honest. I think he's pretty damn good.
No, but I mean, he's generally seen as being the easy guy to call out.
Okay, yeah.
At welterweight.
He's the Michael Bisping of the division, where everyone's like, well,
exactly. He's nice Michael Bisping.
Yes.
But generally has actually managed to, apart from when Bisping actually won the belt, I would say that Magny has actually turned back the challenges more often than Michael Bisping tended to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his win over, he beat Hector Lombard. He beat, Kelvin Gastelum is still his most impressive win. And a somewhat dull decision win over Carlos Condit. But, he's one of those guys where you're just maybe a bit like Tim Boach, where you're just like, how did he get into this position sometimes? And then, how did he even become a ranked contender? And then he'll beat someone. You're like, oh yeah, he's good at stuff.
He's got a style that's weirdly effective,
Yeah.
Because it does have some obvious holes in it. But I guess the question here is Santiago Ponzinibbio the guy to take advantage of those holes?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in this week, everybody. Boy, it's nice to get out of here early for once, huh?
Yeah. I'm glad we got that one resolved.
Why do you say that is? What's your take on Ponzi?
So Magny's problems are with functional kickboxing and more to the point, functional pressure kickboxing, because he is a pretty high volume, long range striker, and a lot of MMA fighters are just happy to just concede any particular range, or in terms of a stand-up fight, they'll just be like, well, we're just going to throw punches at each other for a while, and whatever happens, happens. And against those kind of people, Magny is somewhat, he can have a bit of a field day, because he has, in a void, he has a nice jab. He does a good job of kind of manipulating people's hands out of the way. He throws a good pace. He throws at a good pace. He's got a nice right hand and he drops behind it. And given a kind of just aimless mid-range fight, he's pretty dangerous. Beyond that, though, he has the problem of many tall fighters in that his defense is pretty porous and that he's heavily reliant on locking up the clinch to defend himself, and he's particularly vulnerable to getting kicked in the legs, and none of that seems like it's going to play well against Pons. So yeah, it seems like a tough matchup, very similar to the RDA one, just without the same nightmarish top position game that from the Pons.
Yeah, when I talk about glaring holes or flaws in Neil Magny's game, one of them is obviously that he has all of the weaknesses that tall, long fighters generally have, without a lot of the things that usually make those weaknesses really avoidable. We saw James Vick against Justin Gaethje. James Vick's got a good jab, and he'll set you up and feint you at that from long range and keep you at that distance and make it as dangerous as possible for you to bridge the gap between out of range and in range for your comparatively shorter arms. And Neil Magny is like really weirdly inconsistent with that kind of thing. He slaps and pawls with his left hand as much as he actually throws it. Like if Neil Magny were just popping a jab out of the chest of his opponents constantly, he'd be a much more effective fighter, wouldn't he? Like it doesn't seem like it would really take that much to change how effective Neil Magny is on the feet. Like I think he would have fucking mopped the floor with the Carlos Condit who showed up to fight him if he were a more consistent, just pot shotting kind of outfighter. But
yeah, he tends to try and be more mobile than his actual like defense and footwork warrants. Like it's a high movement style, but without any actual. Yeah, he just tends to kind of pester at the opponent rather than actually making it cost them to close distance on it.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. And then when they do close distance, the problems that tall guys have is like he's visibly uncomfortable. He has a really respectable clinch game to fall back on, but in that middle distance where his already sort of inactive and ineffective hands become more so, then yeah. And you watch Ponzanibbio's fight with Nordine Taleb, and it was competitive. It was very close, but Taleb is a much better schooled outfighter than Neil Magny. Much more consistent with his jab and much better with his combinations. And what Magny has that other fighters like that don't have is like a weird clinch game, really weirdly effective takedowns, and very good top control. But those have not been the things that have been troubling Santiago Ponzinibbio. He moves well. He controls distance well. He defends and counters well. Process is the word of the day for me for whatever reason, but he is a fighter with good process. He's well schooled. Even if he has his technical issues and so on and so forth, like he fights in a way that makes absolute sense to me. And Neil Magny doesn't always. So yeah, Ponzanibbio is going to put the pressure on him, hit him in the body, chop away at his legs. And, I don't know. Knockout seem likely? Could be.
Yeah. Ponz hits hard. And it's 5 rounds, which in some ways that favors Magny. He is very, very tough. Mm-hmm. And he does tend to work his way back into fights. He is clearly, in his own way, he is a rope fighter, but he's a thinking man's rope fighter. He's, when he's won, it has tended to be when he's won his upsets, they've tended to come late in fights. I'm not sure how well that clinch game plays here. It requires him allowing Ponzanibbio to navigate space in on him, basically, and then grabbing him, and then locking up the body, and then getting the body lock, and then doing his whole thing of, stretching the other guy out with his shoulder under the chin, and then once his posture's destroyed, then just tripping him over. Yeah. I do really like lots of parts of Magny's game. Mm-hmm. It's just, the whole just doesn't have, the whole can be taken apart in too many ways.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with all that. It also sort of would require like a guy like Ponzanibbio to come crashing into the clinch. At the very least, like a very good sense of the range of his punches and the perfect point at which to catch people on those punches. I just think Magny's going to end up against the fence, and you don't want to be there against Santiago Ponzinibbio. So, co-main event. Last thing we're going to discuss today. Featherweights, Ricardo Llamas, Darren Elkins, sort of a comeback opportunity for both guys, 2 of the seasoned veteran contenders in the featherweight division. Darren Elkins no longer underappreciated. Ricardo Llamas has never, I don't think, received the appreciation that he's really due for how good of a fighter he is, how consistently he has maintained his level of competition over the years. But he is coming off of 2 losses into this one, the last one a close, weird, ugly one to Mirsad Bektic. Before that, the shocking KO to Josh Emmett. And of course, Darren Elkins is himself coming off a loss to Alexander Volkanovski, who beat at least a dozen shades of shit out of him without throwing it away in the last minute the way Mirsad Bektic accidentally did. So, Phil, you were saying you think this is a potentially bad style matchup for Darren.
Yep, I think it might be a tough one. Basically, the thing is, so that we have to think of about Ricardo Llamas is that he is an opportunist, and we know this about him. And in that sense, Llamas' game makes a lot of sense. The functional pieces fit together. He has a good jab. He has a good leg kick. He's got incredible opportunism when it comes to latching onto guillotines and choke submissions. He's good at scrambling. Where he has struggled, it has traditionally been against very buttoned up technicians who have equal or comparable athleticism to him. And in this sense, it might have actually been beneficial that for Mirsad Bektic that he actually turned up as a much he turned up against Llamas as a much more conservative kind of tri-star trained fighter. Mm-hmm. People might have been disappointed to see Bektic turn up and then have a close, mostly kind of wrestling and jab centric fight with Llamas where he didn't take many risks. But in all honesty, that's normally been how people have taken Llamas out. I mean, that's normally been when people have given him, when people give him opportunities is when he actually really shines. Mm-hmm. And basically Elkins is going to give him a lot of opportunities. He is a wild man on the feet, and Llamas, as mentioned, still has a very nice jab and a very good leg kick. He's a very willing wrestler rather than a necessarily a particularly good one with regards to Elkins. But that's never been particularly, if you think of, for example, and this is going to sound really weird, but Diego Sanchez is, as we've seen, he might have degraded in multiple other ways, but he still has tremendous cardio, is a great scrambler, and is incredibly relentless. Yeah. And even down at featherweight, he got absolutely nothing done in the wrestling against Llamas. Just nothing. Just got dominated there. And so I just feel like this might be one of those times where we actually see why Llamas is good. I'm not necessarily picking him to fish Elkins, but I do think we'll see Elkins wading forward with his, big looping shots and trying to lock up the clinch, and we'll just see Llamas just sniping him with the jab on the way in, and we'll be like, oh yeah, that's why people don't fight him, incredibly aggressively unless they're prime Chad Mendes. So yeah, that's sort of my read on the fight at the moment. What's your thought?
I think that's very fair. That makes a lot of sense to me. You're sort of bringing me around to your side, but I do want to say that the fact that it's Darren Elkins and not just any other, and it's not Diego Sanchez, does make a difference. To me, Ricardo Llamas does tend to win a lot by finish. He is, as any listeners of this show will know, the archetypal opportunist in my mind. And it's very, very difficult to finish Darren Elkins. I don't think has he ever been submitted?
I don't think so.
Let's find out real quick. I don't think he has. And has he been knocked out?
Chad Mendes.
Oh, of course.
He was submitted by Charles Oliveira.
Okay. Well, again, if someone's going to knock you out, it's not so bad if it's Chad Mendes. If someone's going to submit you, it's not so bad if it's Charles Oliveira. So, not necessarily bad signs. And also, both of those were quite a while ago. And lately, Elkins has just been defined by his relentlessness, his surprising craft, especially with things like strikes. He is, not to go back to the same drum as I always do. I always just pick one thing to fixate on per episode, but Elkins' process as a striker makes a lot of sense. He does respond with counters and builds layers and gives his opponents lots and lots and lots of things to think about which is in part why his super ugly chain wrestling, it does become so effective. And one of the big problems that Mirsad Bektic had against Ricardo Llamas, he won that fight, of course, but a big part of why it was so ugly, impressive as it was that he out-wrestled and sort of out-strengthed Llamas in the clinch, was that he couldn't really, like, build any layers. He's still sort of like one idea at a time as a fighter, and that is not Darren Elkins. And so I wonder about that. If Ricardo Llamas is going to have a difficult time finishing Elkins is a fighter I trust much more than Llamas to just be constantly getting shit done and at the very least forcing things to happen. Whereas Llamas can definitely, aside from the shocking finishes and everything, can definitely be a little passive at times. His own process as a striker is sort of bad. You know, like he moves around and throws like low kicks and like spinning kicks, and he'll show some good fundamentals now and then other times it's like, it's all right. It's really like about getting the other guy to react to the threat of his transitions and things like that. And Darren Elkins just makes people react to him. So I'm with you in that it's hard to imagine Darren Elkins out wrestling Llamas because pretty much no one does. And as you pointed out, again, a while ago, but people have out-wrestled Darren Elkins. You know, like Hakron Diaz did it. Jeremy Stevens shut down his wrestling. It's easy to imagine Llamas shutting down Elkins' takedown game as well. But if he's getting very little time to get things done in the spaces between these ugly chain wrestling exchanges, and Elkins is just building and building and constantly staying on him, I can see Elkins picking up a decision. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I think that perhaps things like, I think it's important to distinguish between Llamas's consistency and his process, because if his approach is working, I don't necessarily think he's someone who runs out of ideas. I don't think he has a very deep striking game, but I think if you give him something that it works, if you give him someone that his style works on, I think he's perfectly happy just having a kickboxing match with them, or just I don't think he's the kind of guy who will necessarily get figured out more over time. Like, he still had like one of the more competitive fights that Max Holloway has had as a largely kickboxing based match. I mean, the thing is that he doesn't have much beyond the jab and the leg kick, and he really doesn't have many things that he can offer. But I think that in some ways, I feel like if Elkins is coming at him with multi-strike combinations into, kicks and doing his whole kind of thing of doing big sweeping strikes to try and push people in directions and then grab the clinch. The thing is that I feel like that is the kind of stuff that Llamas really can solve with just a jab. I think he can solve pretty much everything Elkins throws at him by just jabbing him.
Yeah, you might be right.
I feel like so I feel like it's kind of a tough one. I feel like it's one of the ones where, I mean, maybe I think that the main thing is that I worry slightly that Llamas is on decline. He's always been an underrated athlete, and there's been a lot of kind of explosion and sudden moments of offense in his style. And yeah, I find myself wondering that he's had two straight fights, one of which where he got shockingly knocked out, and the other one where he just got overpowered by a younger man. And Elkins, for whatever his other problems, has been looking like he's in the best shape of his career lately. But other than that, I do think it's a rough style matchup for Elkins.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think I'll probably still pick Llamas as well, but I don't know. I'm curious to see. I'm curious to see how the activity and the pressure matches up with Llamas's sort of occasionally formless style. So.
Well, I mean, Bektic was a terrible matchup for Elkins as well, and look at how that turned out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, Darren Elkins is going to knock Ricardo Llamas out in round 3, and that's the end of the story. Thank you all very much for listening to this episode of Heavy Hands. Before we wrap up, what do you got coming out this week, my man?
Just got the preview of the Pons versus Magny, which again I think should be a fun fight. I mean, this is the thing is that when Magny tends to lose these kind of fights, you often get to see how good the guys he's fighting are. Mm-hmm. Like when Magny gets blown out of the water, it's often kind of impressive, and when he doesn't, it's impressive too. He's rarely in a dull fight. Other than that, I'm also working on a piece about how the UFC has promoted the flyweight division. I don't know when that's going to be coming out, but keep an eye out for it at some point. I'm probably going to be a bit too busy this week to get it out. But, coming out soon.
Is that article going to have a similar theme to the start of our third segment? Where it's going to say how the UFC has promoted the flyweight division, and then one sentence, it didn't.
It'll be a bit more involved than that, but yeah.
I imagine. Who was it recently who was just online was it Scoggins? Or, there have obviously been a lot of flyweights who were upset about this. Maybe it was Roberto Sanchez, but people were like, how many, they were complaining, like, how many flyweight main events have there ever been in UFC history? Like, you have all these fight night cards and all these divisions, and you still can't manage to try to showcase. You can't put together a flyweight card, you fucking numbskulls. Put together 5 flyweight fights for a main card, all top 15 opponents, and it'll tell people why the division's worth watching. But you just assume people don't like it from the start. And so, you can't make people like it. It's not as if your job is to promote fights. Your job is just to give people exactly what they've already asked for. So,
as someone who writes main and co-main event previews, and I like the man, I have to say I am very tired of writing about Mark Hunt.
Yeah, I love Mark Hunt, but Jesus Christ, give somebody else a shot. All that's unfolding. As for me, I'm still working on that Lando Venata Mike Perry thing. I'm also thinking, I do want to say before we wrap up, I'm looking to do a little bonus episode shit. I did not release last week's bonus episode, which was basically just offcuts from our overlong discussion. There is still a recap of Jared Cannonier's win over David Branch, and I think I'm going to combine that with an episode I would like to be doing in the next day or two. I would like to bring our friend Mookie Alexander on to talk about Alexander Usyk, who knocked Tony Bellew the fuck out last weekend with an absolutely savage left hand, and is just clearly one of the best pound-for-pound boxers on the planet today, and now literally has nothing left to do but move up to heavyweight. It has taken him essentially about 20 months, 2 years, to clear out the entire cruiserweight division, which, if you don't know, is one of the deepest, best divisions in boxing right now. And now he's going to start fighting heavyweights. He's talking about fighting people like Deontay Wilder and all that. Usyk is badass. If you like Vasyl Lomachenko, he is literally just a 200-pound Vasyl Lomachenko. Same trainer, similar style, everything. So,
and he did it all in front of everyone's friends and family.
Yes, that's yeah. As many people on Twitter have been saying, it's the Alexander Usyk beat you up in front of your mom tour, where he's just been going to his opponents' backyards and obliterating them. Always in very impressive fashion. So hopefully Mookie and I'll get a chance to talk about that. And, otherwise, so check out the Patreon for that, by the way. That's a bonus episode. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. So thank you all for listening once again. Find us on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH. That is my handle. Phil, as you hopefully already know, is at Gregal Greg Jackson. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. Unnecessary follow, he's up there with the MMA Twitter greats like our friend Naked Gambling. Barry, I'm sure he loves to have people know his real name. So I'll just shout out to Barry, best hog analyst in the game. And we will catch you guys next week. Again, we're going to be talking about whatever happens on this Magny Ponzanibbio card. We've also got the rematch between Francis Ngannou and Curtis Blades. UFC doing a phenomenal job of making sure that they don't just burn out all of their promising talent. Francis Ngannou had a disappointing performance last time. Let's give him, once again, one of the best rising fighters in the division, and also one of the few guys who, before Ngannou lost to Miocic, was tough enough to survive and make him work hard. Sounds like a great idea, but it will at least, I'm sure, be a compelling fight. And if it's just a win for Curtis Blades, I'm happy for that, because I really like Curtis Blades. So, we'll be talking about all that next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you know you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.